The autumn rain fell in torrents across the manicured gardens of Whitmore Manor, turning the elegant pathways into rivers of mud and transforming the usually pristine grounds into a tempestuous landscape that perfectly mirrored the storm brewing in Duke Alexander Whitmore's heart as he stood face to face with the one woman who had the power to destroy everything he had spent 35 years building. Rebecca Harrington, 26 years old and breathtakingly beautiful despite her rain-soaked appearance, stood before him with her dark hair plastered to her face and her simple grey dress clinging to her trembling form, her amber eyes wide with a mixture of longing and terror as she realized that their secret had been discovered by the very people who could ruin them both. Through the tall windows of the manor house, the cream of London society watched with barely concealed fascination and horror as England's wealthiest and most powerful duke faced off with his children's governess in full view of everyone who mattered, their whispered conversations and stolen glances finally exposed to the merciless scrutiny of a world that would never forgive such a transgression of social boundaries. Rebecca tried to step back, to lower her gaze, to somehow minimize the scandal that was already spreading through the assembled guests like wildfire. But Alex reached out with hands that trembled, not from the cold rain, but from the intensity of emotions he could no longer contain, gently but firmly cupping her face as he forced her to meet his eyes. "Do not look away," he whispered, his voice carrying across the rain-soaked garden with a conviction that silenced even the storm itself. His steel blue eyes blazing with a love so fierce and uncompromising that it took Rebecca's breath away, even as it terrified her to her very core. "I have spent months pretending that what we feel for each other doesn't exist, months trying to convince myself that duty and propriety matter more than the beating of my heart, months believing that I could sacrifice my happiness for the sake of social expectations. But I cannot do it anymore, Rebecca. I cannot stand here in the rain, watching you prepare to walk away from me forever, and pretend that losing you wouldn't destroy me completely." The words hung in the air between them like a declaration of war against everything their world held sacred, a public acknowledgement of a love that crossed every line society had drawn, a moment of truth that would either elevate them both or destroy them utterly. As the rain continued to fall, and the shocked whispers of the ton grew louder behind the windows of the manor, Alex Whitmore, Duke of Whitmore, one of the richest and most influential men in all of England, made a choice that would change both their lives forever. He chose love over duty, passion over propriety, and Rebecca Harrington over everything else his privileged world had to offer. "Let them watch," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word as he pulled her closer, his hands still framing her face as though she were the most precious thing in his universe. "Let them whisper and judge and condemn. I would rather face their disapproval with you by my side than spend another day in their good graces without you." And as Rebecca stared into his eyes, seeing not the powerful duke who commanded respect and fear throughout the kingdom, but the man who had fallen so completely in love with her that he was willing to risk everything for the chance to call her his own, she realized that their story was about to begin in earnest, not with whispered secrets and stolen moments, but with a love bold enough to challenge the very foundations of the world they lived in. The morning mist clung to the grounds of Whitmore Manor like a silk veil, softening the harsh lines of the imposing estate that had been home to the Dukes of Whitmore for over 3 centuries. Rebecca Harrington stood at the nursery window, watching the sun slowly burn away the fog as she prepared for another day of educating the Duke's twin daughters, 8-year-old Lady Charlotte and Lady Elizabeth, who had become the brightest lights in her otherwise carefully ordered existence. At 26, Rebecca possessed a quiet beauty that she had learned to downplay through years of serving in great houses where being noticed by the wrong people could mean instant dismissal. Her dark brown hair was always pulled back in a severe style that emphasized the classical lines of her face, while her amber eyes held depths of intelligence and warmth that she was careful to reveal only to the children in her care. She wore the same grey wool dress every day, a uniform that marked her station as clearly as any badge, and she moved through the grand corridors of Whitmore Manor with the invisible efficiency that was expected of someone in her position. "Miss Harrington," Lady Charlotte called out, as she burst into the nursery with the energy that characterized all 8-year-olds, her golden curls bouncing as she ran to embrace her governess. "Papa said we might go to the village today if we finish our lessons early. May we, please?" "We shall see." Rebecca replied with the gentle smile that had won the hearts of both girls within days of her arrival 6 months earlier. But first, you must complete your French conjugations, and your sister must finish her arithmetic problems. Lady Elizabeth, more reserved than her twin but equally bright, looked up from her slate with the expression of mock despair. Must we really learn arithmetic, Miss Harrington? Mamma always said that ladies need only know enough numbers to manage their pin money. Rebecca felt the familiar pang of sadness that always accompanied mentions of the girl's mother, the late Duchess of Whitmore, who had died in a riding accident 2 years earlier, leaving her husband devastated and her daughters motherless at the tender age of 6. Your mother was a remarkable woman, Rebecca said gently, settling beside Elizabeth at the small table where they conducted their lessons. But the world is changing, my dear. A lady who understands numbers and business will always have more choices than one who does not. Is that why you became a governess? Charlotte asked with the directness that children possessed. Because you understand numbers and business. Rebecca paused, considering how to answer a question that touched on the painful circumstances that had led her to seek employment in service. I became a governess because I love learning, and I love teaching others to love learning as well. Knowledge is a treasure that no one can take away from you, no matter what else you might lose. The girls seemed satisfied with this explanation and returned to their work with the dedication that made teaching them such a pleasure. Rebecca had discovered that both Charlotte and Elizabeth possessed keen intellects that had been largely ignored by their previous governesses who had focused more on deportment and needlework than on developing their minds. It was during their arithmetic lesson that the Duke himself appeared in the doorway of the nursery, his tall frame filling the space as he observed the scene with an expression that Rebecca had learned to read over the months of their acquaintance. Alexander Whitmore was a man of 35 who carried himself with the unconscious authority of someone born to command, his dark hair showing the first threads of silver at the temples, and his steel blue eyes holding depths of intelligence and pain that spoke to the burdens of his position and the losses he had endured. Papa. Both girls cried in unison, abandoning their lessons to rush into their father's arms with the uninhibited affection that was one of the few joys left in his carefully controlled life. "Good morning, my darlings," Alex said, his voice warming in a way that it never did when he spoke to anyone else. "I trust Miss Harrington is not working you too hard?" "She's teaching us about compound interest," Elizabeth announced proudly. "Did you know that if you invest £1 at 5% interest, it will double in 14 years? Alex's eyebrows rose in surprise as he looked over his daughter's head to meet Rebecca's gaze. "Is that so? And what practical application might such knowledge have for young ladies?" "Miss Harrington says that understanding money helps us understand power," Charlotte added, with the seriousness that made her seem older than her 8 years, "and that ladies who understand power can use it to help people." "Does she indeed?" Alex replied, his eyes never leaving Rebecca's face as he spoke. "Miss Harrington seems to have some rather progressive ideas about education." Rebecca felt heat rise in her cheeks at his scrutiny, though she couldn't tell whether his tone suggested approval or disapproval. "I believe in preparing your daughters for whatever future they might choose, Your Grace. The world is changing rapidly, and young women today will face challenges that previous generations never imagined." "An interesting perspective," Alex said, and Rebecca caught something in his voice that made her pulse quicken, despite her best efforts to remain professionally detached. "Perhaps we might discuss your educational philosophy in more detail. Would you join me in my study after the girls' lessons are complete?" "Of course, Your Grace," Rebecca replied, though her heart was racing at the prospect of a private conversation with the man who had begun to occupy far too many of her thoughts. The remainder of the morning passed in a blur of lessons and activities, but Rebecca found herself distracted by the upcoming meeting with the Duke. In the 6 months since she had arrived at Whitmore Manor, their interactions had been limited to brief discussions about his daughter's progress and the occasional encounter in the corridors of the great house. But lately, she had begun to notice a change in the way he looked at her, a warmth in his eyes that went beyond mere appreciation for her work with Charlotte and Elizabeth. When the girls had been dismissed for their afternoon rest, Rebecca made her way to the Duke's study, with hands that trembled slightly as she knocked on the heavy oak door. "Enter," came his voice from within, and Rebecca stepped into a room that perfectly reflected its owner's character. The study was lined with books from floor to ceiling, its leather-bound volumes speaking to a mind that valued knowledge and learning. A fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the Persian carpets and mahogany furniture that had been chosen for comfort rather than ostentation. Alex stood behind his desk, but he moved around it as she entered, gesturing for her to take one of the chairs positioned near the fire. "Please sit. Would you care for tea?" "Thank you, Your Grace, that would be lovely," Rebecca replied, settling into the offered chair and trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened when he took the seat across from her, rather than maintaining the formal distance that their respective positions demanded. "I wanted to speak with you about Charlotte and Elizabeth," Alex began, though something in his manner suggested that the girls were not his only concern. "Their progress under your tutelage has been remarkable. They speak of you constantly, and their enthusiasm for learning has increased dramatically since your arrival. They are exceptional children, Your Grace. Intelligent, curious, and eager to understand the world around them. It's a privilege to teach them." "You've given them something I was unable to provide," Alex said quietly, his eyes fixed on the fire as he spoke. "Since their mother's death, I've struggled to know how to raise daughters on my own. I can teach them about duty and honor, and the responsibilities that come with their station, but you've shown them that they can be more than ornaments in someone else's life." Rebecca felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. "Your Grace, you're an excellent father. Charlotte and Elizabeth adore you, and they're proud of the man you are. They simply need to see that they can be strong and capable in their own right, just as you are." Alex looked up at her then, and Rebecca was startled by the intensity of his gaze. "Is that what you are, Miss Harrington? Strong and capable?" The question was more personal than anything he had ever asked her, and Rebecca found herself struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't reveal too much about her own circumstances. "I try to be, Your Grace. Life has taught me that we must rely on ourselves first and foremost. And what has life taught you about happiness?" Alex asked, leaning forward in his chair, as though her answer was of vital importance to him. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, considering the question and the man who had asked it. "I've learned that happiness is not something we can pursue directly, Your Grace. It comes as a byproduct of living with purpose, of caring for others, of finding meaning in our daily actions." "A wise philosophy," Alex said softly. "But what of love, Miss Harrington? What has life taught you about love?" The question hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Rebecca felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the weight of his regard. I believe love is a luxury that some of us cannot afford, Your Grace." "Cannot afford or dare not risk?" Alex asked, and there was something in his voice that made Rebecca look up, to find him studying her with an expression that took her breath away. "Your Grace, I think perhaps—" "Alex," he interrupted gently. "When we're alone like this, I'd like you to call me Alex." "I couldn't," Rebecca protested, though her heart was racing at the intimacy the request implied. "It wouldn't be proper." "Propriety," Alex said with a bitter laugh. "Do you know what propriety has given me, Miss Harrington? A title I never wanted, responsibilities that consume every waking moment, and a life so carefully regulated that I sometimes feel as though I'm suffocating under the weight of others' expectations." Rebecca stared at him, seeing not the powerful duke who commanded respect and fear throughout the kingdom, but a man who was as trapped by his circumstances as she was by hers. "Your Grace, Alex," he corrected again, rising from his chair to pace to the window that overlooked the gardens where his daughters were playing. "Rebecca, may I speak plainly?" The use of her given name sent a thrill through her that she tried desperately to suppress. "Of course. I find myself in an impossible situation," Alex said, his voice low and intense as he turned back to face her. "For months now, I've been trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is simply gratitude for the care you've shown my daughters. But I can no longer pretend that's true." Rebecca felt the world tilt around her as she processed his words. "Your Grace, you cannot mean—" "I mean that I've fallen in love with you," Alex said simply, the words falling between them like stones dropped into still water. "I love your intelligence, your compassion, your strength, and the way you've brought light back into this house. I love watching you with Charlotte and Elizabeth, seeing the way you nurture their minds and spirits. I love the sound of your laughter, the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, the grace with which you move through a world that has given you little reason to trust in kindness." Rebecca rose from her chair on unsteady legs, her mind reeling from the impossibility of what he was saying. "Your Grace, this is madness. I'm a governess, a servant in your household. You're a duke, one of the most powerful men in England. We live in different worlds." "Do we?" Alex asked. moving closer to her with each word. Because from where I stand, we live in the same world, one where two people who care for each other are kept apart by arbitrary rules that have nothing to do with the content of their hearts. But the scandal would be considerable, Alex agreed. But Rebecca, I've spent my entire life doing what was expected of me, marrying whom I was told to marry, living according to rules I had no part in making. My wife was a good woman, and I cared for her. But what I feel for you is something I've never experienced before. It's worth any scandal, any consequence, any price society might demand. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she struggled with the magnitude of what he was offering and the impossibility of accepting it. Alex, you don't understand what you're asking. If we were discovered, you would lose everything. Your reputation, your standing, your ability to provide for your daughters. And if I don't take this chance, Alex replied, reaching out to gently wipe away her tears, I'll lose the only woman I've ever truly loved. Rebecca, I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm simply asking you to consider the possibility that love might be worth the risk. Before Rebecca could respond, a sharp knock at the study door interrupted them, and they sprang apart as though they had been burned. Alex called for whoever it was to enter, and his secretary appeared with a stack of correspondence that required immediate attention. Forgive the interruption, Your Grace, the man said, though his eyes flicked between the Duke and Rebecca with obvious curiosity. But these documents require your signature before the evening post. Of course, Alex replied, his voice carefully controlled as he returned to his desk. Miss Harrington, thank you for the discussion about the girl's education. We'll continue this conversation at a later time. Rebecca curtsied and fled the study, her mind spinning with the implications of what had just occurred. As she made her way back to the nursery, she realized that everything had changed in the space of a single conversation. The careful distance she had maintained, the professional boundaries she had constructed, the walls she had built around her heart, all of it had crumbled under the weight of 3 simple words. I love you. That evening, as she helped Charlotte and Elizabeth prepare for bed, Rebecca found herself studying their faces with new eyes. These children, whom she had come to love as though they were her own, were the daughters of the man who had just declared his love for her, the man who was willing to risk everything for the chance to call her his own. Miss Harrington, Charlotte said as Rebecca tucked her into bed, are you sad tonight? You seem different. I'm not sad, sweetheart, Rebecca replied, though her voice was thick with emotion. I'm simply thinking about some important decisions I need to make. Papa says that the most important decisions are usually the hardest ones, Elizabeth added from her own bed. But he also says that we should always choose love over fear, even when it's scary. Rebecca stared at the child, wondering if Alex had somehow coached his daughter to deliver such pointed advice. Your father is a very wise man. He is, Charlotte agreed, and he's been much happier since you came to live with us. We think you make him smile more. As Rebecca extinguished the lamps and left the girls to their dreams, she found herself facing the most difficult decision of her life. She could continue as she had been, maintaining the careful distance that propriety demanded, and spend the rest of her days wondering what might have been. Or she could take the leap of faith that Alex was offering, risking everything for the chance at a love that defied every rule their world had established. Standing in the corridor outside the nursery, Rebecca realized that her heart had already made the choice, even if her mind was still struggling to accept it. She was in love with Alexander Whitmore, Duke of Whitmore, and no amount of rational thought could change that fundamental truth. The question now was whether she had the courage to fight for that love, knowing that the battle ahead would test them both in ways they had never imagined. Stolen moments. The following weeks passed in a delicate dance of stolen glances and carefully orchestrated encounters that left both Rebecca and Alex walking a tightrope between propriety and passion. They found excuses to meet, discussions about the girl's education, consultations about household matters, chance encounters in the library when Rebecca came to select books for her lessons, but each conversation carried an undercurrent of tension that grew stronger with every passing day. Rebecca discovered that Alex was nothing like the distant, imposing figure she had imagined before their conversation in his study. When they were alone, he revealed a warmth and humor that transformed his entire countenance, sharing stories of his childhood, his dreams for his daughter's futures, and his struggles with the weight of responsibilities he had never wanted but could not abandon. I never intended to be a duke, he confided one afternoon as they walked through the portrait gallery, ostensibly so Rebecca could teach Charlotte and Elizabeth about their family history. I was the second son, remember? I was supposed to be free to pursue my own interests, perhaps join the military or study law. But when my brother died in that carriage accident, you gave up your dreams to fulfill your duty, Rebecca said softly, understanding the sacrifice he had made in a way that few others could. I told myself it was temporary, Alex continued, his voice growing distant as he stared at a portrait of his late brother, that I would find a way to balance duty with personal happiness. But duty has a way of consuming everything in its path, until you wake up one day and realize you've forgotten who you were before the title claimed you. And who were you? Rebecca asked, genuinely curious about the man beneath the ducal facade. Alex smiled, and for a moment she glimpsed the young man he must have been before tragedy and responsibility had shaped him into the formidable figure he had become. I wanted to be an architect. I dreamed of designing buildings that would last for centuries, of creating beauty that would outlive me. I still have my sketches, hidden away in my private chambers like guilty secrets. That's not a guilty secret, Rebecca protested. That's a beautiful dream. Why did you abandon it entirely? Because dukes don't design buildings, Alex replied with a bitter laugh. Dukes manage estates, sit in parliament, marry appropriate women, and produce heirs to carry on the family name. Personal desires are luxuries that men in my position cannot afford. Rebecca felt her heart ache for the dreams he had sacrificed, the passions he had buried beneath layers of duty and expectation. Perhaps it's not too late to reclaim some of those dreams. Perhaps not, Alex said, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Perhaps the right person could help a man remember who he used to be, who he still could be if he had the courage to try. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Charlotte and Elizabeth, who had been exploring the gardens with their nurse, but the words lingered between Rebecca and Alex like a promise of possibilities neither dared to voice aloud. As autumn deepened into winter, their relationship evolved into something that existed in the spaces between propriety and scandal. Alex began joining Rebecca and the girls for their afternoon lessons, claiming interest in his daughter's education, but clearly drawn by the opportunity to spend time in Rebecca's company. She, in turn, found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that had nothing to do with her professional duties and everything to do with the way her heart raced when he entered the room. Miss Harrington, Charlotte observed one particularly cold December afternoon as they worked on their French translations, why do you and Papa look at each other the way Mama and Papa used to look at each other in the portraits? Rebecca felt heat flood her cheeks as she struggled to formulate an appropriate response. I'm not sure what you mean, sweetheart. Elizabeth and I have been watching, Charlotte continued, with the matter-of-fact tone that 8-year-olds use to deliver devastating observations. You smile differently when Papa is here, and he stands closer to you than he stands to anyone else. Nurse says it means you fancy each other. Charlotte, Rebecca exclaimed, though she couldn't help but smile at the child's directness. That's quite enough speculation about adult matters. But we wouldn't mind, Elizabeth added quietly, looking up from her slate with serious eyes. If you and Papa fancied each other, I mean. We like you very much, and Papa has been happier since you came to live with us. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the innocent acceptance in the girls' voices, the simple assumption that love could conquer the complex social barriers that stood between their father and their governess. You're very sweet, both of you, but sometimes grown-up feelings are more complicated than children understand. Why? Charlotte asked, with the relentless curiosity that made her such a joy to teach. If two people care for each other and make each other happy, why should it be complicated? Before Rebecca could attempt to explain the intricacies of social hierarchy and proper behavior to an 8-year-old, Alex appeared in the doorway of the nursery with an expression that suggested he had heard at least part of the conversation. Papa! Elizabeth called out, apparently unaware of the awkwardness of the situation. We were just telling Miss Harrington that we think you fancy each other, and we think that's lovely. Alex's eyes met Rebecca's over his daughter's head, and she saw a mixture of amusement and tenderness that made her heart skip a beat. Is that so? And what makes you think such a thing? You smile more when she's here, Charlotte explained, with 8-year-old logic. And you always find reasons to come to the nursery now, even when we're not in trouble. Perhaps I simply enjoy observing your excellent progress in your studies, Alex suggested, though his eyes never left Rebecca's face. Perhaps, Elizabeth agreed with a knowing smile that was far too sophisticated for her age, or perhaps you enjoy observing Miss Harrington. Elizabeth, Rebecca gasped, mortified by the child's boldness. But Alex laughed, a rich, warm sound that filled the nursery with joy. Your daughters are very perceptive, Miss Harrington. Perhaps we should be more careful about the signals we send. Or perhaps, Charlotte suggested with the optimism of childhood, you should stop pretending and just admit that you love each other. The word love hung in the air between them like a challenge, and Rebecca felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crumble. Girls, I think it's time for your afternoon rest. Please go with Nurse, and we'll continue our lessons later. As the children were led away, still chattering about their observations, Rebecca and Alex found themselves alone in the nursery, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built together over the past months. The books they had read, the lessons they had shared, the moments of joy and discovery that had bound them together in ways that went far beyond their respective roles as governess and employer. They're not wrong, you know, Alex said quietly, moving closer to where Rebecca stood by the window. About the way I look at you, about the reasons I find excuses to be near you. I've tried to hide it, to maintain the proper distance, but I'm failing miserably. Alex, Rebecca whispered, his name a prayer on her lips. We cannot continue like this. The servants are beginning to talk, and if word reaches the wrong people— I know, Alex replied, his voice heavy with frustration and longing. But Rebecca, I cannot simply turn off what I feel for you. Every day that passes makes it stronger, makes the thought of losing you more unbearable, and every day that passes makes discovery more likely, Rebecca countered, though her resolve was weakening under the intensity of his gaze. Alex, you have to understand what would happen if we were caught. You would survive the scandal. Men always do. But I would be ruined, unemployable, cast out with nowhere to go and no way to support myself. Then marry me, Alex said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him as much as they shocked her. Marry me, and let society say what it will. I have enough wealth and power to weather any storm, and I would spend every day of my life ensuring your happiness and security. Rebecca stared at him, her heart racing with a mixture of joy and terror at the impossibility of what he was suggesting. Alex, you cannot be serious. A duke cannot marry his children's governess. The scandal would destroy you, would hurt Charlotte and Elizabeth, would give me the only happiness I've ever truly wanted, Alex interrupted, reaching out to take her hands in his. Rebecca, I've lived my entire life according to other people's rules, other people's expectations. I married whom I was told to marry, lived as I was told to live, sacrificed my dreams for the sake of duty and propriety. But I will not sacrifice you. I will not sacrifice us. But your daughters love you as much as I do, Alex said firmly. They've just told us so themselves. Rebecca, Charlotte, and Elizabeth have been happier in the past 6 months than they've been since their mother died. You've given them not just education, but love, stability, and the kind of maternal care they desperately needed. Why should society's arbitrary rules prevent us from making that arrangement permanent? Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she struggled with the magnitude of what he was offering and the impossibility of accepting it. Because those arbitrary rules have real consequences, Alex. Because the Tun would never accept a governess as a duchess, and your daughters would pay the price for our happiness. Or, Alex said, pulling her closer until she could feel the warmth of his breath against her face, they would learn that love is more important than social convention, that true worth has nothing to do with birth or title, and that their father had the courage to choose happiness over fear. Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor forced them apart, and they were once again reminded of the precarious nature of their situation. But as Alex left the nursery with a lingering look that promised their conversation was far from over, Rebecca realized that her heart had already made its choice, even if her mind was still struggling to accept the consequences. That evening, as she prepared for bed in her small chamber in the servants' quarters, Rebecca found herself staring out the window at the gardens, where she and Alex had shared so many meaningful conversations. The winter landscape was stark and beautiful, covered in frost that glittered like diamonds in the moonlight, and she couldn't help but think that their love was like that frost, beautiful but fragile, precious but vulnerable to the harsh realities of the world around them. A soft knock at her door interrupted her reverie, and she opened it to find a young maid holding a sealed letter. "For you, miss," the girl said with a knowing smile. "From His Grace." Rebecca's hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper, recognizing Alex's bold handwriting immediately. "My dearest Rebecca, I cannot sleep for thinking of our conversation today, for the words I spoke and the words I should have spoken. I know that what I'm asking of you seems impossible, that the obstacles we face appear insurmountable. But I also know that what we feel for each other is real and precious and worth fighting for. I'm hosting a house party next week for the Christmas season, and half of London society will be in attendance. I know that our situation will become more difficult with so many eyes upon us, but I also see it as an opportunity. Let them see us together. Let them witness the depth of our connection, and perhaps some of them will understand that love transcends the artificial boundaries society has created. I'm not asking you to make any decisions tonight, only to trust that we will find a way through this together. You are the light that has illuminated the darkness of my life, and I will not let that light be extinguished by fear or convention. All my love. Rebecca read the letter 3 times before carefully folding it and placing it in the drawer where she kept her few precious possessions. As she finally settled into bed, her mind raced with the implications of what the coming week would bring. A house party filled with the most influential members of society, all watching, all judging, all waiting for any sign of scandal or impropriety. It would be the ultimate test of their ability to maintain their secret, and Rebecca had a sinking feeling that it would also be the moment when their carefully constructed world would either solidify into something permanent and beautiful or shatter into pieces that could never be repaired. Either way, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, there was no turning back now. The die had been cast, and their fate would be decided in the crucible of society's scrutiny, where love would either triumph or be destroyed by the very forces they were daring to defy. The house party. The week before Christmas brought a flurry of activity to Whitmore Manor, as preparations began for the most elaborate house party the estate had hosted in years. Alex had invited 30 of London's most influential families for a week-long celebration that would include formal dinners, musical entertainments, hunting parties, and a grand ball on Christmas Eve. For Rebecca, it meant navigating a minefield of social interactions while maintaining her position as the children's governess and hiding her growing feelings for their father. "Miss Harrington," Charlotte said, as they watched carriages arrive from the nursery window, "will we be allowed to attend any of the festivities? We've been practicing our curtsies and our French conversation." "You'll join the adults for tea each afternoon and for the Christmas Eve ball," Rebecca replied, adjusting Elizabeth's hair ribbon as she spoke. "But remember, you must be on your best behavior. There will be many important people watching everything you do." "Will you be there too?" Elizabeth asked, her young face serious with concern. "At the ball, I mean?" Rebecca hesitated, unsure of the answer herself. Governesses typically remained in the background during such events, but Alex had hinted that he wanted her present for the children's sake. "I'll be nearby if you need me," she said finally, which seemed to satisfy both girls. The first few days of the house party passed without incident, though Rebecca found herself under increasing scrutiny from the female guests who seemed puzzled by her presence and uncertain of her exact status in the household. She was clearly more than a servant, given the way the Duke consulted with her about his daughters and the respect with which she was treated by the senior staff, but she was equally clearly not a member of the family or a guest. "Tell me, Your Grace," Lady Pemberton said to Alex during one of the afternoon teas where Rebecca sat quietly with Charlotte and Elizabeth. "Your governess seems quite involved in household matters. Is that typical in your experience?" "Miss Harrington has proven invaluable in managing my daughter's education and well-being," Alex replied smoothly, though Rebecca caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested his patience was being tested. "I've found it beneficial to include her in decisions that affect the children." "How progressive of you," Lady Pemberton replied with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "though I do hope you're careful not to blur the lines too much. Servants can sometimes develop ideas above their station when given too much familiarity." Rebecca felt heat flood her cheeks at the obvious insult, but before she could respond, Charlotte spoke up with the fearless honesty of childhood. "Miss Harrington isn't just a servant," the little girl announced to the assembled company. "She's the kindest, smartest person we know, and Papa says she's made our family happier than we've been in years." "Charlotte," Rebecca murmured, mortified by the child's outspoken defense, but touched by the loyalty it represented. "It's true," Elizabeth added, apparently deciding to support her sister's declaration. "Miss Harrington teaches us mathematics and history and French, but she also teaches us about kindness and courage and standing up for what's right." Alex's eyes met Rebecca's across the room, and she saw pride and love and something that might have been determination in his gaze. "My daughters are quite right," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. Miss Harrington has indeed made our family happier, and I'm grateful every day for her presence in our lives." The comment sent a ripple of speculation through the assembled guests, and Rebecca knew that their secret was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The way Alex looked at her, the tone of his voice when he spoke about her, the obvious affection between her and his daughters, all of it was creating a picture that society would not be slow to interpret. That evening, as Rebecca helped the girls prepare for bed, Charlotte voiced the question that had been hanging in the air all day. "Miss Harrington, why was that lady so mean about you being a servant? You're not just a servant, you're part of our family." Rebecca sat on the edge of Charlotte's bed, choosing her words carefully. Some people believe that there are strict rules about how different types of people should interact with each other. They think that servants and employers should maintain a certain distance. "But that's silly," Elizabeth protested from her own bed. "If people care about each other, why should it matter what their jobs are?" "It shouldn't matter," Rebecca agreed quietly. "But unfortunately, many people in society believe it does." "Papa doesn't believe that," Charlotte said with absolute confidence. "Papa thinks you're wonderful, and he doesn't care what anyone else thinks." Rebecca's heart clenched at the child's innocent faith in her father's ability to overcome social conventions through sheer force of will. "Your father is a very special man," she said softly. "But even special men sometimes have to make difficult choices." "What kind of choices?" Elizabeth asked, her young face troubled by the sadness she heard in Rebecca's voice. Before Rebecca could answer, a soft knock at the nursery door announced Alex's arrival for his nightly visit with his daughters. He entered with his usual warm smile, but Rebecca could see the tension in his shoulders and the careful way he avoided meeting her eyes directly. "Good evening, my darlings," he said, settling into the chair between their beds. "Did you enjoy the afternoon tea?" "Lady Pemberton was horrid to Miss Harrington," Charlotte announced without preamble. "She said mean things about servants getting ideas above their station." Alex's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Lady Pemberton sometimes speaks without thinking. You mustn't let her words trouble you." "They don't trouble us," Elizabeth said firmly. "But they troubled Miss Harrington. We could tell." Alex finally looked at Rebecca, and she saw apology and frustration and something deeper in his eyes. "I'm sorry you had to endure that," he said quietly. "Some people find it difficult to recognize worth when it doesn't come with a title attached." "It's quite all right, Your Grace," Rebecca replied, though they both knew it wasn't all right at all. "I'm accustomed to such attitudes." "You shouldn't have to be," Alex said, his voice carrying an edge that made both girls look at him with surprise. After the children were settled for the night, Alex lingered in the nursery, clearly wanting to speak with Rebecca privately, but uncertain how to begin. "The situation is becoming untenable," he said finally, his voice low and urgent. "The guests are beginning to speculate, and I can see the way some of them look at you. I won't have you subjected to their cruelty." "Alex, we knew this would happen," Rebecca replied, though her heart was breaking at the pain in his voice. "We knew that our feelings for each other would eventually become apparent to others." "I should send you away," Alex said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "For your own protection, I should give you an excellent reference and help you find a position somewhere far from here, somewhere safe from gossip and speculation." "Is that what you want?" Rebecca asked, though she wasn't sure she could bear to hear his answer. "What I want," Alex said, moving closer to her with each word, "is to announce to every person in this house that I'm in love with you, that I intend to marry you, and that anyone who has a problem with that arrangement is welcome to leave my home immediately." "Alex!" "I know it's impossible," he continued, his voice growing more passionate with each word. "I know the scandal would be enormous, that society would never accept it, that my daughters might suffer for my choices. But Rebecca, I cannot continue this charade much longer. I cannot keep pretending that you're merely an employee when you're the most important person in my world." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face as she struggled with the impossible choice he was presenting. "What are you asking of me?" "I'm asking you to trust me," Alex said, reaching out to gently cup her face in his hands. "I'm asking you to believe that love can overcome any obstacle, that what we feel for each other is worth any price society might demand. I'm asking you to marry me, Rebecca, and let the world say what it will." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor forced them apart once again, and Alex left the nursery with a look that promised their conversation would continue. But as Rebecca prepared for bed that night, she knew that the moment of decision was rapidly approaching. She could continue to hide their love, Continue to pretend that her feelings for Alex were merely professional respect, and watch as the situation became increasingly impossible. Or she could take the leap of faith he was offering, knowing that it might destroy them both. The next morning brought news that would force the decision sooner than either of them had anticipated. Lady Pemberton, apparently unsatisfied with her previous attempts to create trouble, had taken it upon herself to investigate Rebecca's background more thoroughly. "Your Grace," Alex's secretary said as he entered the study where Alex was reviewing correspondence, "Lady Pemberton has requested a private audience with you. She claims to have information of vital importance regarding Miss Harrington." Alex felt his blood run cold at the words, knowing instinctively that whatever Lady Pemberton had discovered would not be to Rebecca's advantage. "Send her in," he said grimly, preparing himself for battle. Lady Pemberton entered with the air of someone who held all the cards, her smile sharp and predatory as she settled into the chair across from Alex's desk. "Your Grace," she began without preamble, "I feel it's my duty as your guest and your friend to inform you of some disturbing information I've uncovered about your children's governess." "I'm listening," Alex said, his voice carefully neutral despite the rage building in his chest. "Miss Rebecca Harrington is not who she claims to be," Lady Pemberton announced with obvious satisfaction. "Her real name is Rebecca Harrington Wells, and she's the daughter of a disgraced gentleman who lost his fortune through gambling and poor investments. She was briefly engaged to a young man of good family, but the engagement was broken when her father's debts became public knowledge. She's been working as a governess under an assumed name to avoid the scandal that destroyed her family." Alex absorbed this information with growing fury, not at Rebecca for hiding her past, but at Lady Pemberton for her obvious delight in exposing it. "And you're telling me this because she's clearly set her cap at you, Your Grace," Lady Pemberton replied with false concern. "A woman of her background, with her reduced circumstances, would see marriage to a duke as the solution to all her problems. She's using your daughters to ingratiate herself with you, and I fear you're too honorable to see her true motives." "I see," Alex said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what would you have me do with this information?" "Dismiss her immediately, of course," Lady Pemberton said, apparently missing the warning signs in his tone, "before she can do any more damage to your reputation or your daughter's well-being." Alex rose from his chair with the controlled grace of a predator preparing to strike. "Lady Pemberton, let me be very clear about something. Miss Harrington's past, whatever it may be, is of no concern to me. Her character, her kindness, her intelligence, and her devotion to my daughters are what matter. If you think I would dismiss the best governess my children have ever had based on malicious gossip and social prejudice, then you have seriously misjudged my character." Lady Pemberton's face flushed red with embarrassment and anger. "Your Grace, surely you cannot be serious. A woman who has deceived you about her very identity has done nothing more than protect herself from exactly the kind of cruelty you're demonstrating right now," Alex interrupted, his voice growing stronger with each word. "And if I discover that you've shared this information with anyone else, or that you've made Miss Harrington's life difficult in any way, you'll find yourself persona non grata in this house and every other house that values my friendship." "You're making a terrible mistake," Lady Pemberton said, rising from her chair with obvious agitation. "This woman will ruin you, mark my words." "The only person attempting to ruin anyone in this conversation is you," Alex replied coldly. "I suggest you focus on your own affairs and leave mine to me." After Lady Pemberton departed in a huff of righteous indignation, Alex sat alone in his study, processing what he had learned about Rebecca's past, and feeling his love for her grow even stronger. She had endured the loss of her family's fortune, the breaking of her engagement, and the necessity of working under an assumed name, all while maintaining her dignity and her capacity for love and kindness. If anything, her struggles had only proven her strength and resilience. But he also knew that Lady Pemberton would not keep the information to herself, that by evening the entire house party would be buzzing with speculation about the mysterious governess who had captured the Duke's attention. The moment of decision had arrived, and Alex knew exactly what he had to do. It was time to stop hiding, time to stop pretending, time to choose love over fear and let society say what it would. Rebecca had suffered enough for other people's prejudices, and he would not allow her to suffer any longer. The Christmas Eve ball would provide the perfect opportunity to make his intentions clear, and Alex intended to seize it with both hands, regardless of the consequences. The storm. The afternoon of Christmas Eve dawned grey and threatening, with heavy clouds gathering over Whitmore Manor, like an omen of the storm that was about to break over the carefully ordered world Alex and Rebecca had been trying to navigate. By tea-time, it was clear that Lady Pemberton had not kept her discoveries to herself. Whispered conversations ceased abruptly when Rebecca entered a room, and she found herself the subject of speculative stares and barely concealed hostility from several of the female guests. "Miss Harrington," the Dowager Countess of Ashford said, as Rebecca supervised Charlotte and Elizabeth during the afternoon tea, her voice carrying the kind of false sweetness that always preceded an attack. "How fascinating that you should have such an interesting background. One might say you've led quite an adventurous life for someone so young." Rebecca felt every eye in the room turn toward her, and she knew with sinking certainty that her carefully guarded secret had been exposed. "I'm not sure what you mean, my lady," she replied quietly, though her hands trembled as she helped Elizabeth with her teacup. "Oh, come now," Lady Pemberton interjected with obvious satisfaction. "There's no need for pretense anymore. We all know about your family's unfortunate circumstances, your broken engagement, your need to seek employment under, shall we say, modified circumstances." Charlotte looked up from her cake with a confused expression. "What are they talking about, Miss Harrington? What broken engagement?" Before Rebecca could formulate an answer that would protect the children from the ugliness of adult cruelty, Alex's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "They're talking about ancient history that has no bearing on Miss Harrington's excellent service to my family," he said, his tone carrying a warning that made several of the guests shift uncomfortably in their seats. "I suggest we find more appropriate topics for conversation in front of the children." "But surely, Your Grace," the Dowager Countess persisted, apparently emboldened by the support of her fellow gossips, "you must be concerned about the implications of having someone with such a questionable past in charge of your daughter's moral education." "The only questionable behavior I see in this room," Alex replied with icy precision, "is the tendency of certain guests to mistake malicious gossip for polite conversation." The rebuke was so sharp and so public that several of the ladies gasped audibly, but Rebecca could see that the damage had been done. Charlotte and Elizabeth were looking between the adults with growing confusion and distress, and she knew that her presence was now a source of conflict that would only hurt the children she had come to love as her own. "Your Grace," Rebecca said quietly, rising from her chair with as much dignity as she could muster, "perhaps I should take the children upstairs. They seem tired." "An excellent idea," Lady Pemberton said with false solicitude. "The poor dears shouldn't be exposed to such complicated adult matters." As Rebecca led Charlotte and Elizabeth from the room, she could hear the explosion of whispered conversations that erupted in their wake, and she knew that by evening every person in the house would know the full story of her disgrace and her deception. More importantly, they would all be watching to see how the Duke would handle the scandal of having fallen in love with his children's governess. "Miss Harrington," Charlotte said as they climbed the stairs to the nursery, "why were those ladies being so mean to you? What did you do wrong?" Rebecca's heart broke at the confusion and loyalty in the child's voice. "I didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. Sometimes adults say unkind things about people they don't understand." "But what's a broken engagement?" Elizabeth asked, her young face serious with concern. "And why does it matter what happened to your family?" Rebecca settled both girls on the sofa in the nursery, knowing that she owed them some version of the truth, even if she couldn't explain all the complexities of adult prejudice and social hierarchy. "When I was younger," she began carefully, "my family lost their money, and the man I was supposed to marry decided he didn't want to marry me anymore. Some people think that makes me unsuitable to work for important families like yours." "That's stupid," Charlotte declared with 8-year-old certainty. "You're the best governess we've ever had, and you're kind and smart, and you make Papa happy. Why should it matter what happened before you came to live with us?" "It shouldn't matter," Rebecca agreed, tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "But unfortunately, many people in society believe it does." "Papa won't let them be mean to you," Elizabeth said with absolute faith in her father's ability to fix any problem. "Papa loves you, and he'll make them stop." The innocent words hit Rebecca like a physical blow, because she knew that Alex's love, however genuine, might not be enough to protect her from the storm that was gathering. And more importantly, she was beginning to realize that her presence in his life might ultimately hurt him and his daughters more than it helped them. That evening, as the guests prepared for the Christmas Eve ball, Rebecca found herself facing the most difficult decision of her life. She could attend the ball as Alex had requested, knowing that she would be the subject of whispers and speculation, or she could remain in her room and avoid the confrontation that seemed inevitable. The decision was made for her when Alex appeared at her door, dressed in his formal evening wear and carrying a dress box that clearly contained something expensive and beautiful. "You're not hiding tonight," he said without preamble, entering her small chamber with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. "I won't allow them to drive you into exile through their cruelty." "Alex, you don't understand what you're asking," Rebecca protested, though her heart raced at the sight of him in his evening clothes, magnificent and powerful, and completely focused on her. "If I attend the ball, if we're seen together, the speculation will become certainty. They'll know that that there's something between us." "Good," Alex replied with a determination that took her breath away. "Let them know. Let them see that I'm in love with you and that I don't care what they think about it." He opened the dress box to reveal a gown of deep emerald silk that would complement her amber eyes perfectly, clearly expensive and fashionable enough to make a statement about her importance to him. "I can't wear that," Rebecca whispered, though her fingers longed to touch the beautiful fabric. "It's too fine, too expensive. People will know you bought it for me." "Of course they will," Alex said, his voice warm with love and conviction. "That's exactly the point. Rebecca, I'm tired of hiding. Tired of pretending, tired of watching you suffer for other people's prejudices. Tonight I want everyone to see that you're not just my children's governess. You're the woman I love, the woman I intend to marry, the woman who will be the next Duchess of Whitmore." Rebecca stared at him in shock, her mind reeling from the magnitude of what he was proposing. "Alex, you can't be serious. The scandal would destroy you, would hurt Charlotte and Elizabeth. The scandal would be temporary," Alex interrupted, moving closer until he could take her hands in his. "But losing you would be permanent. Rebecca, I've made my choice. I've chosen love over duty, happiness over propriety, you over everything else this world has to offer. The question is whether you'll choose me in return." Before Rebecca could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted them, and Alex's secretary appeared with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion, but there's been a development. Lord Pemberton is requesting an immediate audience with you. He says it's a matter of honor that cannot wait until morning." Alex's jaw tightened as he processed the implications. "Honor? I see. Very well. Tell Lord Pemberton I'll see him in my study in 10 minutes. After the secretary departed, Alex turned back to Rebecca with an expression that was both tender and fierce. "Whatever happens tonight, whatever they say or do, remember that I love you. Remember that you're worth fighting for, worth any scandal, worth any price they might demand." "Alex, wear the dress," he said firmly, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Come to the ball. Let them see us together, and let them understand that some things are more important than their narrow-minded prejudices." As Alex left to face whatever confrontation awaited him, Rebecca stared at the emerald gown and realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. She could continue to hide, continue to pretend that her feelings for Alex were merely professional respect, and watch as their love was slowly destroyed by secrecy and shame. Or she could take the leap of faith he was offering, knowing that it might destroy them both, but also knowing that it was their only chance for true happiness. 20 minutes later, Rebecca descended the main staircase wearing the emerald gown, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style that emphasized her natural beauty, her amber eyes bright with determination and fear in equal measure. The ballroom was already filled with guests, the cream of London society dancing and conversing beneath crystal chandeliers that cast everything in a golden glow. The moment she appeared in the doorway, conversations ceased and every eye turned toward her. She could hear the whispers starting immediately, speculation about the dress, about her presence at such a formal event, about what it meant that the Duke's governess was dressed like a lady of quality. "Miss Harrington?" Charlotte's voice called out across the ballroom, and Rebecca turned to see both girls approaching with their nurse, their faces bright with delight at seeing their beloved governess in such finery. "You look beautiful, like a princess." "Thank you, sweetheart," Rebecca replied, kneeling to embrace both children, despite the watching eyes of the assembled guests. "You both look lovely as well." "Papa said you would be here tonight," Elizabeth said with satisfaction. "He said it was important for everyone to see how special you are to our family." The innocent words sent another ripple of speculation through the nearby guests, and Rebecca realized that Alex had been preparing for this moment, had been setting the stage for a public declaration that would change everything. She found him across the ballroom, standing near the orchestra with Lord Pemberton and several other gentlemen, his expressions serious as he engaged in what was clearly a tense conversation. When their eyes met across the crowded room, his face lit with a smile that was both loving and triumphant, and he began moving toward her with the confident stride of a man who had made his decision and would not be swayed from it. "Lady Rebecca," he said, as he reached her side, using a title that made several nearby guests gasp audibly. "You look absolutely radiant. Would you do me the honor of dancing with me?" The request was a public declaration in itself. Dukes did not dance with governesses, did not use titles of respect for servants, did not look at employees with the kind of love and devotion that was blazing in Alex's eyes as he extended his hand to her. "Your Grace," Rebecca whispered, her voice barely audible above the music. "Everyone is watching. If we dance together, there will be no going back." "There's already no going back," Alex replied, his voice carrying clearly enough for the nearby guests to hear. "I love you, Rebecca Harrington, and I don't care who knows it." The words fell into the ballroom like stones dropped into still water, creating ripples of shock and speculation that spread through the assembled company with breathtaking speed. Rebecca felt every eye in the room fixed upon them, felt the weight of society's judgment pressing down like a physical force, and for a moment her courage nearly failed her. But then she looked into Alex's eyes and saw not the powerful duke who commanded respect and fear throughout the kingdom, but the man who had fallen so completely in love with her that he was willing to risk everything for the chance to call her his own. She saw the father who wanted his daughters to learn that love was more important than social convention, the dreamer who had sacrificed his own happiness for duty, but was finally ready to reclaim it. "Yes," she said quietly, placing her hand in his, as the orchestra began a waltz. "I would be honored to dance with you." As they moved onto the dance floor, the other couples gradually stepped aside, creating a circle around them as though they were the only two people in the world. Alex held her closer than propriety dictated, his eyes never leaving her face as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Do not look away," he whispered, as she tried to glance toward the watching crowd, his voice intense with love and determination. "Look at me, Rebecca. See only me, and let them see that what we have is real and precious and worth any scandal they might create." "Alex," she breathed, her voice thick with emotion. "What have we done?" "We've chosen love over fear," Alex replied, spinning her gracefully as the music swelled around them. "We've chosen truth over pretense, happiness over duty. We've chosen each other, Rebecca, and that's all that matters." As the waltz drew to a close, Alex led her to the center of the ballroom, where he could address the assembled guests with the authority of his position and the conviction of his love. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent ballroom, "I have an announcement to make. Miss Rebecca Harrington has done me the extraordinary honor of agreeing to become my wife. I hope you'll join me in congratulating the future Duchess of Whitmore." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the delighted squeals of Charlotte and Elizabeth, who had clearly been hoping for exactly this outcome. Then, slowly, a few brave souls began to applaud, followed by others who were either genuinely moved by the love they had witnessed or too polite to show their disapproval publicly. But Rebecca could see the faces of those who were not applauding, could read the shock and disapproval and outright hostility in their expressions, and she knew that the battle for acceptance was far from over. "Your Grace," Lord Pemberton said, stepping forward with an expression of barely controlled anger, "surely you cannot be serious. This woman has deceived you about her very identity, has used her position in your household has brought more joy and love into my life than I ever thought possible," Alex interrupted, his voice carrying a warning that made Lord Pemberton step back. "And anyone who has a problem with my choice is welcome to leave my home immediately. You're making a terrible mistake," Lady Pemberton added, her voice shrill with indignation. "Society will never accept this union, never accept her as a duchess. You'll be ostracized, ridiculed. Then I'll be ostracized and ridiculed with the woman I love by my side," Alex replied with calm certainty. "I can think of worse fates." As the confrontation continued around them, Rebecca felt the weight of what they had just done settling over her like a heavy cloak. There would be consequences, social, financial, personal consequences, that would affect not just them but Charlotte and Elizabeth as well. But as she looked into Alex's eyes and saw the unwavering love and determination there, she realized that she was ready to face whatever came next. They had chosen love over fear, truth over pretense, and each other over the approval of a society that valued appearances over substance. It would not be an easy path, but it would be theirs to walk together, and that made all the difference in the world. The storm had broken over them at last, but Rebecca no longer feared its fury. With Alex's love as her anchor and her own strength as her guide, she was ready to weather whatever tempest society might send their way. After all, some things were worth fighting for, and love, true, deep, transformative love, was the most precious of all. After the storm, the week following the Christmas Eve ball passed in a whirlwind of departures as most of the house party guests fled Whitmore Manor like rats abandoning a sinking ship. Some left with expressions of outraged propriety, others with barely concealed satisfaction at being present for such a delicious scandal, but very few remained to offer their support for the Duke's shocking announcement. Rebecca found herself in the strange position of being both celebrated and reviled, often within the same conversation. The servants, who had always treated her with respect, now showed her the deference due to a future duchess, while the few remaining guests alternated between cold politeness and barely veiled hostility. "Miss Harrington, or should I say Your Grace?" Lady Thornton said during one particularly awkward breakfast, her tone suggesting that the title was somehow distasteful in her mouth. "I do hope you understand the magnitude of what you've undertaken. Being a duchess requires more than simply capturing a duke's affections." "I'm well aware of the responsibilities involved," Rebecca replied with quiet dignity, though her hands trembled slightly as she helped Charlotte cut her breakfast kipper. "And I intend to fulfill them to the best of my ability." "How admirable," Lady Thornton continued with false sweetness. "Though I do wonder how society will receive a duchess who was once in service. The precedent is unusual, to say the least. Mama always said that true nobility comes from how we treat others, not from who our parents were," Charlotte interjected with 8-year-old wisdom, apparently tired of listening to adults say unkind things about her beloved governess. "Your mother was a wise woman," Alex said as he entered the breakfast room, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere as he moved to stand behind Rebecca's chair in a gesture of unmistakable support. "And she would have been delighted to welcome Rebecca into our family." Lady Thornton's face flushed at the gentle rebuke, but she was not quite bold enough to continue her attack in the Duke's presence. After she departed with her husband later that morning, the manor finally returned to something approaching normalcy, though Rebecca knew that the real challenges were only beginning. "Papa," Elizabeth said as they walked through the gardens that afternoon, the same gardens where Alex had first declared his love for Rebecca, "will people always be mean to Miss Harrington now? Will they always say unkind things about her being our new mama?" Alex knelt to his daughter's level, his expression serious as he considered how to explain the complexities of social prejudice to a child. "Some people will say unkind things, sweetheart, because they don't understand that love is more important than the circumstances of someone's birth. But there will also be people who see how wonderful Rebecca is and who will welcome her with open arms." "Like us," Charlotte added firmly. "We think she's perfect for our family." "Yes, like us," Alex agreed, his eyes meeting Rebecca's over his daughter's head with a warmth that made her heart skip a beat. "And like everyone else who matters." The first real test of society's reaction came 3 weeks later, when Alex and Rebecca traveled to London for their formal engagement announcement and the beginning of wedding preparations. The city was buzzing with gossip about the Duke's shocking choice, and Rebecca found herself the subject of intense scrutiny wherever they went. "The betting books at White's are running heavily against the marriage lasting more than 2 years, Alex reported with grim humor after returning from his club one afternoon. "Apparently the consensus is that I'll come to my senses once the novelty wears off." "And what do you think?" Rebecca asked, though her tone suggested she was only half joking. "I think," Alex said, pulling her into his arms in the privacy of his London townhouse, "that they're about to lose a great deal of money, because I have no intention of coming to my senses where you're concerned." The wedding preparations proved to be another minefield of social complications. Many of the ton's most prominent families declined their invitations, citing previous commitments or sudden illnesses that fooled no one, but others, perhaps intrigued by the romance of the story, or simply unwilling to offend a duke of Alex's wealth and influence, accepted with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "The Queen has agreed to receive you," Alex announced one morning, holding a letter bearing the royal seal. "She's curious to meet the woman who has caused such a stir in her kingdom." Rebecca felt her knees go weak at the prospect. "The Queen? Alex, I can't possibly." "You can and you will," Alex said firmly, though his voice was gentle with understanding. "Rebecca, you're going to be a duchess. Meeting the Queen is part of your new role, and I have complete faith in your ability to handle it with grace and dignity." The royal audience took place on a crisp February morning at Buckingham Palace, and Rebecca had never been more nervous in her life. She wore a gown of deep blue silk that Alex had commissioned specifically for the occasion, her dark hair arranged in an elegant style that emphasized her natural beauty while maintaining the dignity appropriate for such a formal meeting. "Miss Harrington," Queen Victoria said, as Rebecca completed her curtsy, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed, but also a warmth that was unexpected. "Or should I say, the future Duchess of Whitmore. We have heard a great deal about you." "Your Majesty," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm honored by your gracious reception." "The Duke speaks of you with great affection," the Queen continued, studying Rebecca with sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "He tells us that you have been instrumental in his daughter's education and happiness." "Charlotte and Elizabeth are remarkable children, Your Majesty. It has been my privilege to teach them." "And now you will have the opportunity to guide them as their stepmother," the Queen observed. "A significant responsibility, particularly given the unusual circumstances of your union." Rebecca felt the weight of the moment, knowing that her response would likely determine the royal family's attitude toward her marriage. "Your Majesty, I understand that my background is unconventional for someone in my position, but I love the Duke and his daughters deeply, and I'm committed to using whatever influence I may have to serve the Crown and the people of England to the best of my ability." The Queen was quiet for a long moment, her expression thoughtful as she considered Rebecca's words. "Love," she said finally, "is not as common in marriages of our station as one might hope. We are pleased to see that the Duke has found it, and we hope that your union will be blessed with happiness and prosperity." The royal approval, while not enthusiastic, was enough to silence many of the most vocal critics of the match. If the Queen was willing to receive the future Duchess of Whitmore, then society would have to follow suit, however reluctantly. The wedding itself took place on a beautiful spring morning in May, in the chapel at Whitmore Manor, where Alex's family had been married for generations. The ceremony was smaller than might have been expected for a duke's wedding, but it was filled with genuine warmth and joy from those who had chosen to celebrate the couple's love, despite society's reservations. Rebecca walked down the aisle in a gown of ivory silk and Brussels lace, her face radiant with happiness as she moved toward the man who had changed her life so completely. Charlotte and Elizabeth served as her attendants, their faces glowing with delight at finally seeing their beloved governess become their new mother. "Dearly beloved," the Archbishop began, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alexander James Whitmore, Duke of Whitmore, and Rebecca Elizabeth Harrington in holy matrimony." As they exchanged vows, promising to love, honor, and cherish each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, Rebecca felt a peace settle over her that she had never experienced before. This was where she belonged, with this man and these children, building a life based on love rather than convention, on truth rather than pretense. "You may kiss the bride," the Archbishop announced, and when Alex lifted her veil and pressed his lips to hers, Rebecca felt as though her heart might burst with joy. "I love you, Your Grace," Alex whispered against her lips, using her new title with a warmth that made her laugh through her tears. "And I love you, Your Grace," Rebecca replied, marveling at the fact that she was now the Duchess of Whitmore, that the impossible dream had somehow become reality. The reception that followed was a celebration of love triumphing over adversity, of two people who had dared to choose happiness over convention and had found their courage rewarded. As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Rebecca looked into Alex's eyes and saw their future there, not without challenges, but filled with love, purpose, and the kind of happiness that came from being exactly where they belonged. "No regrets?" Alex asked softly, as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Only one," Rebecca replied with a smile that was both mischievous and tender. "What's that?" Alex asked, though his tone suggested he wasn't truly worried. "That it took us so long to find the courage to fight for what we wanted," Rebecca said, echoing the sentiment he had expressed so many months ago in the rain-soaked garden where their love story had truly begun. As the evening drew to a close and they prepared to begin their new life together, Rebecca reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had gone from a disgraced governess hiding her true identity to the Duchess of Whitmore, from a woman who believed she was destined for invisibility to someone who would use her position to help others who had been overlooked or misjudged. But most importantly, she had learned that love really could conquer all, not by ignoring the obstacles in its path, but by facing them together with courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in each other's worth. 5 years later, the nursery at Whitmore Manor was filled with the sound of children's laughter as 10-year-old twins James and Catherine Whitmore played with their older sisters, Charlotte and Elizabeth, now 13, and blossoming into remarkable young women under their stepmother's loving guidance. Rebecca, now 31, and every inch the Duchess she had never imagined she could become, watched from the doorway with a smile of pure contentment. "They have your energy," Alex observed, joining her with their afternoon tea, "and your determination to right every wrong they encounter. Did you see James earlier, insisting that the stable boy's son should be allowed to join their lessons?" Rebecca asked with a laugh. "And Catherine trying to convince the cook to save extra food for the village families who are struggling this winter." "They're learning from the best example," Alex replied, settling beside her on the window seat where they had shared so many important conversations over the years. The Whitmore Foundation has helped over 100 families rebuild their lives after financial ruin or social disgrace. "You've created something extraordinary, my love." "We've created something extraordinary," Rebecca corrected, leaning against her husband's shoulder with the comfortable intimacy of a couple whose love had only deepened with time. "I could never have accomplished any of it without your support and belief in me." The Whitmore Foundation had indeed become one of the most respected charitable organizations in England, providing not just financial assistance, but education, legal support, and emotional guidance to families who had fallen from grace through no fault of their own. Rebecca had used her own experience of loss and redemption to create a network of hope that ensured no one would have to face such challenges alone. "The letter from Parliament arrived this morning," Alex said, pulling an official-looking envelope from his pocket. "They want to formally recognize your charitable work with a special commendation. It seems your influence has reached even the highest levels of government." "Our influence," Rebecca corrected again, though her eyes shone with pride and satisfaction. "We've proven that love really can change the world, one family at a time." As they sat together in the nursery where their love story had begun, surrounded by the children they had raised and the life they had built, both Alex and Rebecca knew that they had achieved something far more valuable than social acceptance or political recognition. They had found true love, built a marriage based on mutual respect and shared values, and used their position to make the world a better place for others who needed hope and second chances. "Do you ever think about that night in the rain?" Rebecca asked, her voice soft with memory. "When you told me not to look away, when you chose to defy every rule of society for me." Alex's smile was warm and full of love as he raised her hand to his lips for a gentle kiss. "Every day," he replied, "and every day I'm more grateful that I had the courage to choose love over fear, to see past society's prejudices to the extraordinary woman beneath. My only regret is that I waited so long to find the strength to fight for what we both deserved. And I'm grateful," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion, "that you taught me to see my own worth, to believe in love again, and to understand that our past doesn't define our future, our choices do." As the sun set over the gardens of Whitmore Manor, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Duke and Duchess of Whitmore held each other close and marveled at the life they had built together. Their love story had become legend in London society, not just as a romance, but as proof that true love could indeed conquer all, that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to fight for it, and that the greatest nobility came not from birth or title, but from the courage to love without reservation. Their children would grow up understanding that worth was measured by character rather than circumstances, that love was more powerful than prejudice, and that everyone deserved a second chance to find happiness. And somewhere in England, in great houses and humble cottages where young women faced their own scandals and challenges, the story of Alex and Rebecca would be told as a reminder that fairy tales could come true for anyone brave enough to believe in love. The rain had stopped falling long ago, but the love it had revealed continued to flourish, stronger and more beautiful with each passing year, a testament to the transformative power of two hearts that had dared to choose each other over everything else the world had to offer. Their love story became a beacon of hope that illuminated the truth that genuine worth comes from character, not circumstances. and that true love has the power to transform not just two hearts, but an entire society's understanding of what really matters in life. Duke Alexander Whitmore and Duchess Rebecca prove that when love is built on mutual respect, shared values, and unwavering commitment to seeing the best in each other, it can overcome any obstacle that fear and prejudice might place in its path. Their union showed the world that the greatest courage lies not in following society's rules, but in having the strength to write your own story based on love, truth, and the unshakable belief that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost.